Rapids. Mr. Kearns, could you take roll?
Yes, sir. Mayor Blazer,
Here.
Alder Austin,
Present.
Lee Tao, Eric Doven,
Here.
Ben Gaudreau. Absent. Thad Kubaschak,
Here.
Jeff Marutz.
Here.
We have one absence. That gives us a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We are on item 1, which is approval of reports from the January 5th, 2023 Plan Commission meeting. What are your wishes?
Motion to approve?
We have a motion and a second.
Can I, sorry,
Lee motioned,
Lee, okay,
that
thank
seconded.
you.
Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody oppose? That motion carries. We're on item 2, which is 23-000484 Badgerland Survey LLC, a request for a certified survey map to combine 2 lots at 1811 25th Avenue South, parcel IDs 340460 and 340465, and dedicate the right-of-way on 25th Avenue. Mr. Kearns.
Thank you. Typically, the CSM would be approved internally with the recent amendment to the subdivision code. However, in this instance, there is a required dedication. The city's official street map requires 40 feet to be dedicated along 25th Avenue. And so this request is before you. Pretty plain and simple. Again, it's 40 feet along the entirety of what would be 25th Avenue South extended. We currently own the other 40 feet, it's currently right-of-way. Therefore, it is fitting, and it is in line with the official street map. So we are making a motion, or we are making a recommendation to request or to approve the request for the CSM and the dedication. Thank you.
Thank you. Commission, any questions, comments, or what are your wishes? Yeah, go ahead.
Kyle, how does something like this happen where the street right-of-way originally wasn't wide enough? Not that I'm questioning, our motion, but it's kind of one of these quirk things. Is this something where we would want to take some time one time, and go through all the right-of-ways in town to ensure that we have the proper width, or how does something like this happen?
Yeah, so the state gives us authority to adopt official maps. One of them is an official street map. So we do have an official street map that's on file in the engineering department that identifies different road classifications, existing classifications, proposed roads, changes to existing roads, and it identifies that 25th Avenue continue in this instance. So from a planning standpoint, whenever we get a certified survey map, we have the authority to require that dedication through that process at that time. There are rare instances where, recently we amended the official street map over on Jackson Street, East Jackson Street, because it no longer functioned the same way that it used to. In this case, though, this is, I believe, classified as an arterial, minor arterial. So 80 feet is the required width on the official street map. So we're just following through with that planning document as a guide.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'll make a motion to approve Plan 23-484 as presented with the dedicated right-of-way.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion carries. We're on to item 3, which is 23-000500. Keller Inc. Request for architectural review for a commercial facade improvement to a principal structure and accessory structure at 4200 A Street South, parcel ID 3414135. Mr. Kearns.
Thank you. Within our zoning code, we have some very preliminary or very minor facade standards. So in this case, we've got a request for Paper Savings Bank to perform significant facade improvement at their existing branch location here. And we've performed that review in the staff report and are obviously recommending approval. I want to note that there are no changes to the site. So everything's being done in the existing footprint of the building, so there's no addition. There's no second floor, although there is a significant change in the roof line and the architecture of the roof. This is not technically a site plan review. It's solely for the architectural review as outlined in our zoning code. That also means that there are no changes to the landscaping in this case. Here's some existing photos of what's currently there on 8th Street. And then we have some renderings. As you can see, the roof line goes from a flat roof on the southern portion to kind of a gabled roof. And then there's the injection of a bunch of different facade materials, which should really be a nice touch to this corridor and obviously improve the aesthetics of this property. From our standpoint, it again is pretty straightforward. They do a good job of breaking up kind of the monotony. Again, there's not a whole lot because of all the different building lines and roof lines in this case. So we feel as though the architectural standards are met, and we would recommend approval. There are a few conditions. There were some potential concerns that, you know, any lighting obviously doesn't exceed the requirement, which is 0.2 foot candles at the neighboring commercial property lines. So we've added that as a condition of approval. Any landscaping, obviously, that's removed should be replaced, and that they obtain necessary permits through the city, and that we have the ability to approve minor modifications. Again, with that, we recommend approval with those 5 conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead.
Number 1, for the recommendations for the cutoff fixtures being used for the west and the south. Is that not for the north just because it borders the roadway? Just thinking of the residential properties across the street.
Correct. So typically with street lighting and so forth, it gets very difficult to identify the lighting and the source of the lighting and the foot candles. I mean, we can perform measurements, but coder's really more so concerned with the adjacent properties, whether they're commercial or residential in nature. So, you know, in this case, I think any street lighting that crosses into the right-of-way kind of mixes with the street lighting and shouldn't be a concern unless it's obviously a floodlight.
Thank you. That was all.
Any other questions?
I'll make a motion for approval with staff's recommendations and conditions, the 5 conditions presented in front of us.
I'll second, or go ahead. I'll second it. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? That motion carries. We're on to item 4, which is 23-000465, City of Wisconsin Rapids request for a planned development district amendment for a minor alteration to expand a patio area, add a walkway extension, and install shade sail structures at 220 3rd Avenue South, parcel ID 3402596. Mr. Kearns.
Thank you, Mayor. So we have a request by the city, in this case, the property owner of the facility and the property to expand the concrete area, construct an accessory building as proposed, which in this case is a kind of a sunshade structure with a single support, very similar to what you'd find at the Aquatic Center. This property is zoned Planned Development District, And under that zoning classification, any changes have to be determined to be either minor or major in nature. So you may recall that the Planned Development District allows for flexibility in the underlying regulations. In this case, we've deemed this to be a minor improvement, and therefore would not necessarily have to go through the full amendment process for that Planned Development District plan. With that being said, it then takes action by the Plan Commission and the Common Council to just acknowledge that minor improvement and then approve it as such. We've also performed a site plan review on this and note that the site can accommodate this, the structure meets the setbacks, and it is appropriate for this location. Right now, it's a lot of grassed area out front. Again, they're looking to expand, their outdoor space and provide some of their patrons with some shade. This is the amendment that I noted with regards to the ordinance. Again, we're recommending to approve this minor alteration. Again, we are deeming it as such. Note that this is also consistent with 2009 downtown waterfront plan that discusses creating a sense of place, improving our aesthetics in downtown. It also enhances that green space area and serves a good purpose for those patrons within that building. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know Jake Klingforth is on as well with the city, who can provide more details specifically about the improvements.
Anyone have any questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, what are your wishes? Thank you. We have a motion and a second by Lee to approve with recommendations. Any further questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion carries. We're on to item 5, which is 23-000463, City of Wisconsin Rapids, public hearing and action on a request to amend Chapter 11 zoning ordinance, specifically Article 15, fencing, including modifications to various sections, including general requirements, dimensional requirements, and fence materials. Ms. Kearns.
Thank you, Mayor. After a couple years of enforcing the city's zoning code with which fences are included, there have been a few consistent sections that are in need of some clarification. One of them is with regards to side yards, specifically side yards that are on a corner lot. Right now, it says that, the code says that you cannot have a 6-foot-high fence beyond kind of the front plane of your house, which for many people, if their house is addressed off of a corner, would be kind of their side yard that would be on another corner or the other street frontage. So it ultimately becomes kind of a waste of their rear yard space if they want to fence it in. And when looking at other codes, other codes in surrounding communities, that is inconsistent. And I think it isn't of benefit to the property owner if they can only fence in, 3/4 of their backyard and they have to maintain a large section. We recently had a variance come forward on this item as well with a very similar situation for a fence. And so it comes up pretty frequently. That is, I think, the biggest one that prompted this amendment, but because of that, we chose to look at what are some other concerns or inconsistencies, and one of them is with regards to the measurement of height. So we're recommending to change some of the height standards to allow for some flexibility with irregular lots in terms of the grade separation that may or may not exist, to allow for decorative caps to be put on above that 6-foot height, and allow for some different ground maintenance techniques of that grade or that measurement. Additionally, We've provided some clarity regarding fence materials, and then some clarity regarding barbed wire. There have been some instances where you might have, a cell phone tower or another industrial user that requires barbed wire in an area that maybe is adjacent to residential or a commercial corridor, and it's a benefit of the public to protect whatever that use is. Right now, our barbed wire standards are fairly strict, so we've tried to clarify them and allow barbed wire in non-manufacturing zones, right, for the public health and safety. But those requests would come before Plan Commission, and they would make the determination if the use is unique enough to permit barbed wire in those situations. I think we included a list of, or called out those specific amendments in that fence ordinance in the packet. I believe blue is new insertions, red is deletions, and with that, I'd be happy to answer any specific questions you have.
Thank you. I guess the first item we'll take up is a public hearing. So 4:16, we can open a public hearing. I'll call 3 times. Does anybody wish to speak against the request? For a second time, does anybody wish to speak against the request? And for a third and final time, does anybody wish to speak against the request? Well, for a first time, does anyone wish to speak in favor of the request? And for a second time, does anybody wish to speak in favor? And for a third and final time, does anybody wish to speak in favor of the request? We'll close the public hearing at 4:17 p.m. Plan Commission members, do you have any questions, comments, or what are your wishes? Go ahead, then.
Kyle, I'm kind of looking at this, and I'm very familiar with a side yard, front yard type of situation because I live on a corner, as you may know. I think, and I tried reading through this, and maybe I missed it. Because one of the challenges, I guess, would be is where would you put it on a side yard because when you got your front yard and you're not on a corner, you abide by the front yard setback, correct? So I mean, you're not going to have the fence anywhere forward toward the street from your house, right, or your primary structure. But so then, do you put it on the edge of the right of way? For example, what do I got, a 66-foot street on my side yard? So then, wherever the center of the street is, I would come all the way to the theoretical lot line, or where the right-of-way ends, or how is that defined?
Correct. So your side yard would, right now, under the current code, allow you to come to the edge of your home, the corner of your house, and no further. So it says either the front yard setback of 25 feet or the front plane of the house. So theoretically then, if your house is set back 20 feet, you've got 20 feet of what would be your rear yard, because you're on a corner lot that isn't fenced in, right? So if you've got dogs, or if you've got a pool or something, it just doesn't make sense. It's not usable then because you can't really fence it in. It becomes somewhat awkward. With the change that's proposed, we would permit, in the side yard instance, which is also a street yard, a 6-foot high fence, 2 feet off the right-of-way. So that's the standard setback for all fences, is that they have to be 2 feet off the public right-of-way. Right now, though, if you're not on a corner lot, you've got a neighbor to your left and a neighbor to your right, you can only have a 4-foot high fence in your front yard. And that would remain. You can only have a 4-foot high fence. What this ordinance amendment says is, if you're a corner yard, in the rear yard, you can, on the side street, you can have a 6-foot high fence up to 2 feet off the public right-of-way, if that makes sense.
No, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I had a question on measurement of height. I see that was added that it will be measured from the surface of the ground immediately below the fence to the top rail of the fence. I think we're trying to do is the top part of the fence, but if you think of like a wooden fence, if there's rails going across and the picket goes 6 inches higher than that, are you measuring from the top of the picket or from that cross member rail? I don't know if people would get confused by that.
Yeah, and we were trying to identify and looked at a few other codes to clarify this, because there are a ton of different fence designs out there. And a lot of them too, the posts will have a 6-inch cap or something. And I don't think it's right to have a 5.5-foot fence then and have a 6-inch cap, because the cap isn't providing any sort of visual barrier. So you're losing that 6 inches. So I think we were trying to be consistent and basically say, aside from the posts, we're measuring whatever that plane, the top rail or plane kind of the fence is, cannot be higher than 6 feet. So I think if you had pickets, right, that were side by side, it would be the top of the picket. And if we want clarity there, we can add that as an example if you've got specific language.
Yeah, not that I have. I guess I was just wondering, but maybe just the top plane of the fire. I don't know what wording that would be or how that would go. But if other codes say top rail and you're comfortable with that, I'm good. If you can enforce that.
Yeah, and I think if you keep reading, A provides the 3 exceptions, and then, that last, below that last exception is kind of a catch-all, right? If there's a unique instance where there's some sort of weird design, we would have the authority to, maybe measure from the top picket if they're side by side versus the rail underneath the picket.
Thank you.
Yep.
I got a question. So what do
Yeah.
you do when you got someone that owns the front lot and the back lot to the next street? That becomes part of their backyard so they can go all the way to the road, or no?
So that becomes a through lot, and yes, they would, typically, they're gonna be addressed off of one or the other. If they're addressed off of one, we're gonna look at, and that's kind of the main entrance, we're gonna look at that as being their front yard. The back then would be their rear yard, and they could build up to the right-of-way. Again,
With the
fully
6 foot-
utilize their rear yard on that second street right-of-way,
Okay,
if that makes sense.
yep.
Does that have to be a combined lot, or if they own 2 separate lots?
So typically, to improve a lot, yes, you have to have a principal use on the property.
Okay.
To have an accessory use. So same with a shed. You can't just put a shed on a lot.
Mr. Rayl?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just, I guess, a couple quick questions. With the barbed wire, Kyle, when I looked at this, is there anything in the residential area, or is it just, I guess, what was listed here? Or did I miss something?
So the intent is to not permit barbed wire in a residential area.
Thank you.
But I will note that there are some, look at like what Quipco operates. There are some infrastructures, same with water and light, that exists, and for the public health and safety, I think there are unique circumstances where if they're replacing the fence right now, they can't put barbed wire there. Even if they have it, the code says they can't do it. So this exception here, coming to Plan Commission, describing the uniqueness of the situation, maybe describing the utility or the infrastructure that exists, Plan Commission could approve the replacement of that barbed wire fence.
Okay. How many, and you don't have a percentage really, but how many people, I guess, you get that come in and actually check what the ordinance says before they build the fence?
I would probably say 80 to 90% of people, come in and check with us. There are a few that, probably go unnoticed, and there are a few that are caught after the fact. In some instances, they're in their rear yard and they're no higher than 6 feet, so we just require them to come and get a permit, depending on the situation, right? Our policy is to charge them double the permit fee for their error in not obtaining the permit prior to installation. Sometimes if, in the case of the one that I referenced that went to the Zoning Board of Appeals, she installed it after the fact without a permit and was still seeking some sort of waiver or exception, and the zoning board was her only course of action.
Well, thank you. I guess, I'm glad to hear that it's around 80% or something that, I would have guessed lower than that myself, but you're in the office, so. How about chicken wire? I seem to have noticed more, maybe, I think, of people using that, actually even close to the sidewalk in certain areas, using it for a fence around pools.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we stand with that?
So chicken wire is really only permitted if it's for a garden,
Yep.
or on a very temporary basis, like a snow fencing type
Yeah.
of situation. There are instances, one that I can think of, where somebody was framing panels, and inside they had chicken wire with wooden rails. It was stained, so it was basically like a chain link design, but instead of having aluminum rails and aluminum top and bottom, it was framed with wood, and it was tacked and it was nailed. And in that case, we permitted it because of the aesthetic nature that it provided, because of the way it was framed. But prior to permitting it, we asked for a picture. We asked for a design of how they were going to be utilizing it. Most people, though, that do chicken wire, it's your cheap metal post, and they wrap it with chicken wire. That would not be permitted as a permanent fence.
Okay, thank you. There's been a change in ordinance control with that, as far as looking at complaints. And I guess maybe this isn't quite the place or the right question. But how can some of these that have been put in, and to me anyway, they aren't legal, what can be done about that? Obviously, it's not in your department no more.
Correct. So fences fall in the zoning code. If illegal fences, fences without a permit are brought to our attention, we still have MyGov, which is the software we use to document the violation, to send a correction notice. If they fail to meet the deadline in the correction notice to get a permit and to comply, we will then follow up with, a citation. Most of the time, if it's a chicken wire fence, it's fairly easy to pull the metal post, roll up the fence, and comply. And I think that's what we see. There are people that try to stretch kind of the rules and say, well, if I nail a couple pallets together, that's my fence. It's a wooden fence. And we've said in those instances, well, what's the intent of the pallet? Typically, the intent of a pallet is to hold something for transport. It's not to construct a fence. So in those cases, we've said no. Now, if somebody said, I'm taking reclaimed pallets, I'm pulling off the boards, and I'm cutting the boards to an equal dimension, I'm putting a top and bottom rail and fence posts, and I'm staining it all, in that case, we've said, well, again, the aesthetic and the design is appropriate to be a permanent fence. It's basically reclaimed wood then that has another use. So the point I'm making is there's a lot of violations out there. If they're brought to our attention, we'll handle them. There's also a lot of people that come up with a lot of unique fence designs, and each one is kind of handled on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. And having looked over this and, quickly and read it, for the most part, I think it's an improvement in that, so I just had a few questions and wanted to answer, get them answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, what are your wishes? I guess I can make the motion this time. I'll make the motion to approve the amended Chapter 11 zoning ordinance regarding Article 15 fencing modifications and to various sections within the general requirements, dimensional requirements, and fencing material.
I'll second.
That cover the motion good enough, Kyle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I have a motion and a second. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Anybody
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion carries. We're on to item 6 with
So
the
moved.
adjournment by a motion by Thaddeus. We have a second by Lee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Have a good night. Guess it doesn't matter if you oppose.